Hey YouTubers, it's Vince Romano 26 here, and I am going to be sharing with you an essay that I wrote for my English class on why we should live like it's 1955. Before I read this essay to you, I know there's probably going to be some of you that are questioning why we should live like it's 1955. I had to pick topics for this essay that were actually researchable, so I couldn't just say, oh, I like the 50s because of the style or the way women were built back then, that kind of thing. I had to go with topics that I could find information on. But before I actually read this essay to you, I do want to let you know that there are a lot of things about the 1950s that I do not like. One of which being the racial tension that had been building in America. I am not fond of racism. I've grown up in a very, very racially diverse area my whole life, so I've been with every kind of person from around the world, so I do not like that at all. I'm not very fond of the idea that women were to be submissive of their husband, be submissive to their husbands. I don't like that idea at all because that's not this generation. I didn't like the idea of men doing that to their husbands, or men doing that to their husbands. That was also taboo back then, but I'll get back to that. I don't like the idea. Women being told that they need to be cleaning, they need to be cooking. If they're feeling down, that's what they need to be doing. Things like that are absolutely disgusting. I don't like that. No lady lives under my house and is going to be treated like that. I can promise you that. And I don't like the idea that we were such a strict conservative era in terms of being able to use sexual, we were not allowed to express sexual nature in movies back then. So everything was suggestive, as opposed to movies that Brigitte Bardot did in the 50s that kind of went against what Eisenhower-era filmmakers were to do. Or even something like Betty Page. She would dress all risque in her outfits and, she would go really against what was legal back then. Like, you couldn't go nude and you couldn't have pictures of nude women or even nude men to save your life because, it was just not a very good era in terms of that. So those are my critiques of the 1950s. I'm not saying it's the perfect era. It definitely had its flaws. But there are parts of the 50s that I just absolutely love, and I can't wait to read to you why. But before we start, we've got a picture of Marilyn Monroe, I would say in the late 40s or early 50s. There's a picture of my dream living room, which I hope to God I get to have one day. We have a picture of my favorite car, the 1957 Chevy Bel Air, in that awesome turquoise blue. And then we have a picture of Jane Mansfield in the early to mid-50s posing for a product endorsement. Let me just look at her figure. Totally love it. So now that I've introduced to you my dislikes for the 50s and my title page, let's get to the essay. And I do want to apologize if my flash goes out, but there's nothing really here to see, so. Trying to go retro, but need some ideas as to why? Many people in America are trying to live like their grandparents did in the 1950s. The era seems so fascinating in terms of the style and the quality of living. Many people are trying to live like it's 1955 because people back then seemed to live a happier life and lead a more active lifestyle. Oh, and I forgot to critique another part of the 50s before I read the essay. You could not be homosexual. If you were homosexual, you were completely destroyed in society. I'm not for that. I'm for gay rights. I'm completely open to it. I have plenty of gay friends. I have plenty of even gay family members. And I love them more for being honest about themselves. So that was another thing you couldn't be in the 50s. So screw that. Alright, this is just my title page. So, living in 2014, because I wrote this a year ago, stuck in post-war America. Why we should live every day like it's 1955. What do Marilyn Monroe, a blue vinyl tulip chair, and a Fenton Green four-door Chevy Bel Air with wings have in common? These are extremely popular and iconic figures of the 1950s, a decade that has been recognized in pop culture ever since its end 56 years ago. The 50s were a time of rejuvenation from World War II and from the Great Depression nearly 2 decades earlier. I feel that today, in 2015, we should live every day of our lives like it's 1955, because advertising was way more logical and got straight to the point, as opposed to how the advertising industry chooses to advertise products today, because there was a more active lifestyle back then, and because the quality of merchandise was way better. Advertising. More effective then or now? The advertising industry has played an important role in getting people to buy merchandise for decades. Advertising in the 1950s was extremely effective in getting people to buy things because the ads used logical reasoning and relations to everyday life to get people to buy what the company was offering. The purpose of advertising is to focus either on the experiences of enjoying the product or on the experience enjoying time with the product. Quote, end quote. If human beings do not find pleasure or happiness in a product, they most likely will not buy it. In the 1950s, the advertising industry did an excellent job of expressing the joy of products, such as the joy that Coca-Cola brought to society. If we look at this Coca-Cola advertisement from the 50s, and if I could, I'll move all of my papers here. I want to direct your attention to my computer screen and watch this advertisement.
Nothing else gives you the bracing sparkle and the bright little lift that's so delightful at yours in ice-cold Coca-Cola. Coke has a distinctive flavor all its own that no one has ever succeeded in matching. No wonder Coca-Cola is the most asked-for soft drink in the world. 50 million times a day, at home, at work, or on the way, there's nothing like a Coca-Cola, nothing like a Coke.
Alrighty. So I hope you guys enjoyed that little commercial there. And let me just see if I can focus back right up here. Focus right here. So if we look at that Coke advertisement from the 50s, the ad mentions that there are times every day as you work or you play when a pause would be welcome to you. And it's then that you find the right thought in your mind that only a Coke will do. We as people need to have breaks throughout our work and play day because we want to rest the body and the mind. The purpose of this ad was to get people to purchase Coke while on a break. This is an extremely logical way to get a product like this sold because we all need breaks from work, school, and even from play throughout the day, if you're a kid. Using this kind of method is extremely logical and effective because it helps show others exactly how this product can present a mental break. Using logic is a great method of advertising. Such approaches are extremely effective when it comes to getting people to buy the product, as opposed to a modern-day advertisement from Nike Shoes which attempts to convince consumers to buy its shoes because it will make consumers run faster than a cheetah. That's an illogical and ineffective way to advertise this product because not one human being on this earth can run faster than a cheetah. Let's be real. Another important aspect of advertising back in the 50s was placing advertisements all around the public. Stephen Tipps is the author of The Effect of Media Involvement on Printing Advertising Effectiveness, and he implies that the place where the product is constantly being seen by people in bright, vibrant colors gets people to buy the product. If a product is promoted by ads located in many public places and the message is clear and makes people happy, the likelihood of a sale will increase. This was a common advertising strategy in the 1950s. Another important aspect of advertising in the 1950s was incorporating products into movies and television, also known as product placement, and this method is still used today in many movies and TV shows. However, it's not as effective in advertising the product as it did 60 plus years ago. Alright, and I also want to direct your attention back to my computer screen. I have a little clip from the Coca-Cola History of American Icon DVD. I bought this a few years ago, and it was made in 2002. It goes all the way back to the 1890s, or late 1800s, when Coke was first discovered by Doc Pemberton, or first invented, I should say. And it just goes all the way up to how Coke was influenced from that time period all the way up to present day in 2002. So I'm going to be showing you this little clip here from that documentary. And I apologize that the sun is showing a glare.
The answer came in 1955.
There's a giant living in our house. Coca-Cola in the new family-size bottle. Biggest bottle of Coke you ever saw.
Bigger bottles, all carefully designed to resemble the old familiar classic bottle. In 3 bottle sizes. As one executive put it, bringing out another bottle was like being unfaithful to your wife. But consumers had spoken.
And just look at how that big family-size bottle makes Coke so easy to serve. Use that big...
The thing you want most in the 50s is easy. So you want the supplies of Coke right in your house. That's a real change for Coca-Cola, too, which has been so much associated with the workplace and then even with the armed forces. Suddenly now, it becomes something that is indispensable for the home.
And the message of these changes was coming to Americans through a wooden box that stood in the corner of more and more living rooms every day.
Come on in. Fish is the name. You know, I enjoy watching TV just like you do. And I know this. TV's even more fun with a bottle of Coke in hand. There's nothing like the flavor of ice-cold Coca-Cola.
In the 50s, Americans watching television were largely watching themselves. And the parade of goods brought to them courtesy of post-war prosperity.
Of an electric Kalamazoo. To end, you'll see how like it pots of gasoline...
Coca-Cola had been on the air, the radio, since 1927.
Yes, friends, it's time for another transcribed session of the Coke Club. And here's Morton Downey.
But television was really the medium, I think, that brought it to the forefront because it was in everybody's homes. But more importantly, you could see the product, you could hear the product, because remember they always were showing the carbonation and how everything was fizzing out of the glass, and also see people being refreshed by the product.
Television commercials were rare in those days. Instead, companies would sponsor entire shows and weave their advertising into the flow of the programming. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet was sponsored by Coca-Cola for several years.
Look, from now on, I'll serve Coca-Cola and you serve the steak.
Not on your life. Parties are more fun when you do the cooking. Here, have a Coke and cheer up.
That's the best idea yet.
Okay, and as I apologize ahead of time, my flash did go out, but I hope that won't affect the legibility of my essay here. So we just watched the Ozzie and Harriet, and we watched a little bit more of the documentary because I thought it would be more effective in showing you how the advertising industry worked back then. So we just watched the Ozzie and Harriet's show, a clip from the show where they're throwing a barbecue, and Harriet's serving Coca-Cola, and Ozzie's cooking on the grill. Ozzie says, "Why don't you do the cooking for a change and I'll serve the Coke?" And Harriet says, "Not on your life. Here, have a Coke and cheer up." This is another effective method of advertising used in the 50s. It showed showed society that Ozzie and Harriet's Coke was no different from the ones that are sold on the street corner and served at home. 1950s advertising was extremely effective as to getting the public to buy certain products by using logical reasoning and relations to everyday life. Another extremely effective way that was used in advertising in the early to mid-1900s was the emotional appeal that Coca-Cola incorporated into its advertisements. Andrew Smith is the author of Cola Wars, and he indicates that during World War II, Coca-Cola supplied American troops, promoting itself as a symbol of America and using the slogan, "the friendliest drink on earth." The slogan used back then was extremely effective to those who served in World War II because the servicemen and women needed something to remind them of home. As shown in Figure 1, if I can dig that up for you. Nope, that's not it. I'll get to that one later. I hope it's in here. If it's not, I'm going to be a little disappointed. Here we go. The global high sign, look at those World War II servicemen enjoying that Coke. That is just something that I enjoy seeing because, I can only imagine being in a whole new place halfway around the world and not knowing anything that's around you. And then when you see that one thing that, just brings you back home, Coca-Cola, I can only imagine how much it touched these servicemen. So you see that, and then, as shown in figure 1 that I just showed you, the servicemen are illustrated relaxing to the taste of Coke. These servicemen were probably in an area that was secluded, and having that Coke, as I mentioned earlier, brought joy because it not only brought them comfort because they were drinking their favorite soft drink in the middle of nowhere, but it reminded them of home and the place they were missing. So we have Robin Coultier, who is the author of Guilt Appeals in Advertising. What are their effects in the Journal of Psychology? Of Applied Psychology, sorry. Through his research, he discovered that we distinguish between emotions depicted in advertisements and emotional responses to ads are personally felt emotions. People like to relate to the individuals in the ads. In the 1950s, Coca-Cola advertisements featured servicemen. The idea of this was to help make servicemen feel more at home with Coke. The connection those men had with Coca-Cola on the battlefield was so powerful because it brought them comfort in a situation that was in no way comforting whatsoever: war. Advertising in the 50s was extremely effective in getting people to buy the products being advertised using logical and emotional appeal. Alright, so now we're away from that. Alright, now we're going to get to the part of an active lifestyle. Advertising in the 1950s is just one of the many aspects I love about post-war America. Another piece of the 1950s I enjoy is how much more active people's lifestyles were back then. If we had a time travel machine and took a trip back to the 50s, we would see a lot of differences in society. One of the main aspects of the 50s I noticed is how active people's lives were back then. Alice Smelly is the author of the article, "No Wonder They Were So Slim in the 50s." Forget jogging in the gym. Alice Smelly discovers the fastest way to burn 2,600 calories. Live like it's 1952. Smelly learned that technology was not as advanced as it is today. So in the 50s, lack of technology meant a lot of daily physical exercise was a necessity. In the 1950s, a washing machine, dryer, dishwasher, and appliances that are common in households today were not very common at all back then. In order for clothes to get clean, it was critical to hand wash them and put them through a crank dryer in order to get the water out so the drying process would not take so long. So let's see, here we go. So here's a picture of Alice Smelly, and she is hand cranking her, I think it's a dish towel, I think. So you can see as opposed to a dryer now, that's what they had to do back then. So where were we? And then also lawnmowers, which you can also see in this same figure, were not gas-powered. They were hand-powered, so you had to actually go out into the yard and use that hand-cranked or hand-powered lawnmower to cut the grass. So lawnmowers did not have a motor in them and were not gas-powered. So using a hand-powered lawnmower required a lot more energy and physical activity to make sure that the grass was cut. With all modern advances in technology from a gas-powered lawnmower or an electric washer and dryer, physical activity has decreased over the years. In fact, in 2008, a health survey for England indicated that on average, Brits were sedentary for 6 or more hours every day, meaning that they didn't really do anything for 6 or more hours. Almost half of all that time was spent watching television. With all this technology, we are not as active as we used to be in Western cultures. As shown in British research, we sit in front of the TV, we play video games, we play on the computer, we engage in a lot more activities that require no mobility. In contrast to how people lived in the 50s. Another major issue that is making society so overweight is the fact that we consume nearly twice as much sugar as we used to, according to Lambert. We consume a lot more processed food these days instead of a nutritious home-cooked meal. From the 1940s up through the 50s, a lot of people's food supplies came from their own garden, from what I've learned in my history class for this semester. A lot of people grew their own food and they ate it themselves, and they made delicious home-cooked meals with the stuff they grew in their gardens. So, You know, I'm your typical American. I don't blame people for enjoying fast food because it's so freaking amazingly tasty. But that's where they get you. There is no nutritional value compared to a home-cooked meal consisting of peas, chicken, and rice. In the 40s and 50s, people were in much better shape because they ate more vegetables and complex carbohydrates, which kept blood sugar levels stable, and the meals were filling, as opposed to today's meals. Today, if we ate less junk food, exercised more, and consumed more vegetables as people did in the 50s, we wouldn't have a worldwide crisis of obesity. Now we're going to get to probably one of my favorite parts of this essay, the quality of merchandise. 1950s advertising had great ways of getting people to buy things. The 50s also had a greater impact on active lifestyle, an active lifestyle that was made possible by the quality of merchandise in the 1950s, which was better than the merchandise made today. Keith Barry is the author of the web article 10 Vintage Appliances That Stood the Test of Time. He found that a lot of people who collect antique or vintage appliances really like to use them because, unlike today's appliances, older ones can be repaired, and appliances that were built prior to 1960 were designed to be served and maintained. Appliances made back in the 1950s were not really meant to break. However, if they did break, people could and knew how to fix them. Society was very mechanically inclined at that time. People back then knew how to fix many things that today's average person would not know how to fix because if something breaks, we're just told to buy another one. We took pride in what was made in America and even still use appliances because they never broke. Barry also goes on to say that some people only want smaller appliances that were made in the United States and can't find new ones that meet that requirement. American-made appliances last for decades, and today's appliances don't even last a year no matter how well it's taken care of. Olivia Fleming is the author of The People Who Are Still Living Like It's 1951, captivating portraits take a look inside America's rockabilly community from Mail Online. Fleming discovered that one of the fascinating aspects of the 1950s is the fact that everything Americans owned at that time was designed and made by an industrial designer who labored over not only how things should function, but also how things should look. America back in its heydays, even before the 1950s, was full of factories and manufacturing plants where a lot of our products were being made. Today, most of those factories are either sitting in ruins or are gone and have been moved to China and have been gone for many years. Most of the products we buy today are both designed and made in China or designed in the US and made in China. A lot of people may not be able to afford vintage appliances, clothing, or other pieces because they get really expensive nowadays because there's such a high demand for them. As a substitute, people buy things that are retro or are known as authentic reproductions of a real 50s piece. Personally, I collect antique Coca-Cola serving trays, and I have some really early pieces, one dating to 1910 and the other dating to 1960. And I'll just do a quick glance. You can see up there's my whole wall of my Coca-Cola collective trays. My oldest now is currently 1910, which is all the way over there. I think what I'll do just for this essay purposes, I'll get up close to it. So we have 1910, we've got 1914, and we have 1916. And I apologize if it's, you know what, let me turn the light on so I can show it to you much better. So there we go, we've got 1910, we've got 1914, and we have 1916. Very old pieces, I'm very happy to own them in my collection. And now, let's get back to my essay here. Now that you saw those trays, and as I said, I have some very early pieces, which date to 1910 and the other dating to 1916. In the 1970s, the Coca-Cola company reissued these trays from the early 1900s and then used them as promotional giveaways. Sorry. Collectors like me know that those reproduction trays are not as valuable, are easy to find, and can be bought at a really good price. Some collectors use these authentic reproductions as placeholders in order to fill a gap in their collection, until they can acquire an authentic piece. Personally, I've never done this, but know people who do. I don't like reproductions. The issue I see with buying a retro item is the fact that it's a reproduction and probably made with cheaper material, unlike pieces made from that time period. And also, I find that the value of reproductions are not as much as the originals, which is common and very well known throughout the collecting society. Let's see, where do we start? And it was probably made with cheaper material, unlike pieces from the 50s. Okay, so I should have just started with for example. For example, a pencil skirt from the 50s is still known as a pencil skirt nowadays. The only difference is the fact that it's probably made in China and won't last you very long. However, people turn to reproductions because they're much more affordable. A great aspect of the 1950s, I think, is the fact that China was not the source of the most... Oh, I just typed of most twice. Whoops. China was not the source of most of our common household items. In the 50s, a made-in-China culture did not exist. When a toaster, oven, mixer, or any other major appliance either stopped working or began to malfunction, it was to be fixed, not thrown out. However, in contrast, the made-in-China culture we live in today has taught us that if something breaks, all that we need to do is throw it away and get a newer, up-to-date model of whatever was broken. In the 1950s, and even further back than that, it was much more simple. If a toaster broke, the goal was to get it to work again. It was not to be thrown out. Appliances were made to repair... I just talked fast again. Appliances were made to repair as opposed to appliances today. Living in a made-in-China culture when it comes to the quality of merchandise compared to 60-plus years ago is in no way beneficial. Because all we do is throw away broken pieces, fill the landfills, and replace whatever it is that was broken faster. Merchandise made in the 1950s and back is much better in quality because it lasts a long time and even works 50 to 60 years after it was manufactured. Now, this part of my essay, I had to do an opposing viewpoint, so I had to make a really good point about one of the topics that I've just talked about. So I decided to talk about the idea of living in a made-in-China culture. Opposing viewpoint. Made in China, anyone? We live in what is known as a made-in-China culture where virtually almost everything we go out and buy nowadays is made in China. Brad Tuttle is the economy and policy journalist who wrote, "Forget Buy American, U.S. retailers pushes an imports work campaign, and he claims that having Chinese imports are a good thing because of the following. Imports improve American families' standard of living. They help families make ends meet by ensuring a wide selection of budget-friendly goods, like electronics we use to communicate and many clothes and shoes we wear, and improve the year-round supply of such staples as fresh fruit and vegetables. While I must admit it is nice to be able to go out and get a pair of headphones for a really good deal when my previous set breaks. However, as convenient as that is, that's missing the whole point. I feel that all it is doing is encouraging Americans to spend more money on things overall. 60 plus years ago, the goal in buying something was to buy it once and have it last forever. Nowadays, something like headphones don't last a long time. The only way they do last is if they are made by a really big company and they're taken care of by the consumer. For example, last summer, I got a phone upgrade, or the summer before that. I went from the HTC Evo 4G, which is not a great phone by the way, to a Samsung Galaxy S3. And the S3 really surprised me. It came with a really, really nice set of headphones made by Samsung. They lasted for over a year and a half, and at the time they had just broken on me a few weeks earlier. Samsung had produced these headphones, and they were made in China. I didn't expect them to last as long as they did. My point here is that if something is produced by a top-notch company like Samsung, it will last longer. I do, however, have an issue with the fact that after those broke, I went through about 3 sets of headphones where the quality of the sound was just poor, and each of them were made in China. I wasted money that could have been spent on something else I wanted. While having cheap merchandise may be beneficial because it helps those on a tight budget, it is completely frustrating when something doesn't last as long as we want it to. The phrase, "you get what you paid for," is very accurate with our merchandise today. Tuttle also goes on to say that imports support more than 16 million American jobs. While this may be beneficial to helping push our economy out of the recession we've been in for the last decade, it still doesn't make our goods any cheaper. Or our cheap goods any better, excuse me. Although I might like to keep up with my generation terms with the new trends, I also like the idea of living with old appliances because they work better than today's cheaply made merchandise. Alright, where's that figure that I don't have it with me? Nope. Okay, so these items are currently out of my bedroom, so I have to show a picture of them. So if we look in Figure 5, it depicts a really, really nice looking vintage 1950s aqua blue General Electric fan. I got this as a Christmas gift a few years ago, and I not only wanted it because I love antiques, but because I knew it would work. When I first got it, I plugged it in to see if it worked. The fan did work, but it made a funny noise. Instead of throwing it away, I just decided to take some aerosol air in a can and some olive oil to clear up the motor. After I cleaned up all the gunk inside, it was as if the fan just came out of the box brand new in the 1950s. It works perfectly fine. I used it during the summer when it gets really hot in my room. It blows a really nice cool breeze and it oscillates with no problems. A cheap plastic fan made today would break in a matter of months if I used it as often as I used that blue fan during the summer. The motors in the old fans were built to last for decades because they were made here in the US. Sorry guys, I don't know what's going on. The motors in modern day fans were built in China and are cheaply made. Also, Figure 5 depicts a really nice vintage travel iron I bought over the summer. This was a few summers ago that I bought this. I plugged it in when I got it, and the iron heated up. I mean, it got hot like an iron should get. If I wanted to use it right away, I could. What's nice about most appliances made back in the 20th century is the fact that the appliances were powered up with a cloth cord. These cloth cords have the same idea as a flash drive today. They're removable and can be used in other appliances, kind of like what we do with flash drives. We can save the document to our flash drive that we're working on the computer and put it in another computer and work on it still. So like I just said with the flash drive, we save our work on it, we plug it into another computer and continue doing whatever it is that we're doing. The same principle applies with the cloth cord. It was removable and we could use it on other appliances. For example, if I had a toaster oven powered by one of these cords, I could use it to heat up my toaster. After I was done with it, I could take the cord out and put it in the iron to de-wrinkle my clothing. The nice part is if I were to travel, I wouldn't need so many cords for my appliances, unlike what we need today, because none of the stuff is removable. Today, if I were to travel, I would need multiple electronic devices. I would need a laptop charger, a phone charger, a tablet charger, and more. It's a big waste of electricity. With all the technology that is used today, we waste so much electricity. Back in the early to mid-1900s, electricity was still relatively a new trend, so using very little electricity helped families save money. Using one cord for multiple appliances uses the same exact amount of electricity each time, and hopefully each appliance used the same amount of energy to power it up. If many companies made quality merchandise that was energy-saving, and chargers that can be used for multiple devices, we would not be using up so much energy. One of the biggest issues I have with modern-day appliances is the fact that they are so cheap, it's not worth taking them to someone to fix because the cost to repair it would be way more than what was spent on the product. Back in the early 20th century, a toaster cost way less than one costs today, and they're still better than cheaply made appliances made in present day. Products of the early to mid-20th century were made to be repaired if a malfunction were to occur or if the appliance were to stop working altogether. For example, if I were